What is happening, people? This is episode 14 of the Archive podcast, and myself and Joel. Joel, do you want to say hi?
Hello.
We've just wrapped up filming with Chanel, who was kind enough to join us on the podcast and share some insight on nutrition and her role in team sport and sport in general, and her coaching with clients and her little nuggets of nutritional knowledge.
Yeah, Chanel has worked with, as she goes into a variety of pro teams, in and out doing a master's degree. She's currently working with Swansea City alongside her own personal training clients, which venture over the globe, to be honest. I know she's got people in Canada, along with doing a lot around this area for the nutritional bits. So we'll leave you and we'll roll into the podcast. But thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the second guest appearance on the Archive podcast.
Boom.
I think we'll touch on that in this podcast, I think, because like we said, you're the first female guest on the podcast. Well, the first female on the podcast. And I think you're going to provide quite a lot of insight into working with females and probably upskill us quite a fair bit on what goes on in a female. So with that being said, if you want to just give a little introduction on who you are, what you've done, what you're currently doing, you know, the ins and outs of Chanel.
Okay, so I'm Chanel. I currently work at PAS, the supplement company, and I also work with Swansea City Football Academy. Previously, I've done my Masters at Liverpool John Moores University, and I've worked with Cardiff City Football Club as well. And I've had experience at Sport Wales. I did an internship there during my Masters, which was really interesting. Got to work in loads of different sports at a national level. During my Masters, it was a bit of a crazy year. So I was back and forth between Liverpool. At the time, I was working with Wales women's rugby team. So I was back and forth from Wales and England every week during my Masters. And then I do a day at Sport Wales, and then every other week for a couple of months, I was going to Bath Rugby, which was a really cool experience to work with the seniors there. Basically filled in for a member of staff who left until the end of the season. So that was a really good experience, and done a bit with different rugby academies as well. So like Cardiff Blues I've worked with a few times. We did Wellington Festival, which is basically England rugby academies, like a week-long festival where they scout for players who are going to go into their academy. So that was really fun as well. So yeah, I've done a few different sports, mostly football and rugby, and all football at the moment really, and obviously I do all my online client work as well.
Yeah, she forgot to mention she fueled me for a half marathon, you know. That's the biggest feat of her career, I think. Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest feat of her career so far. I think that's it. But for me, how did you get into the industry then? Because nutrition at the minute, it's rapidly growing, I'd say, as a point of interest in fitness. So how did you get into nutrition to start off with?
So my dad's a nutritionist, and I grew up with, I guess, an interest and more education on nutrition than probably most people would have. So I always remember growing up, like asking him questions about things, but there was one year my dad carb loaded me for a sports day.
How old were you at this point?
I was about 9, I think. And from then on, I was just sold. Like, I was really into it. That was my first real insight into nutrition. So pasta makes you run faster. Yeah, that was the first time my dad was explaining to me what he did with athletes. and he was like feeding me this massive plate of pasta the night before a cross country race, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. So that was like my first, I guess, interest in sports nutrition. That's where it started. And then as I got older, like I'd always ask him questions about different things, but I never really saw that as like a career for me. And then after I finished school, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to go into. So I had a couple of years out, started working at PAS, got into training myself, got more into, I guess, learning about all the products to advise people on, and like got into training and like changed my own nutrition and saw some really good results.
I've got a quick question. So just briefly describe your job role as a nutritionist and the different types of jobs that you've had in the industry.
I'm sorry, I'm going to say like a million times. It's a really bad habit, and I can't.
You won't be as
like,
bad as Dan.
Mine's
You won't be
like,
as
I say
bad as
like
Dan.
every other word. It's
I
fine.
am trying to shift them. Feel free to cut them all out if you can. You might be there for a while. Yeah. So is another one. In nutrition, you kind of have different roles. Obviously, I am into sports nutrition with teams and with athletes, and my job is based on keeping players healthy, helping them to fuel and recover from training, helping them to recover from injury or hopefully avoid injury and illness. Because the less time you are off ill, the more time you can spend in training getting better. And obviously at the higher levels, every percent counts.
Yeah.
And every day that you can spend getting better is an advantage potentially over another team or another competitor, depending on what you do. So I range from like nutrition advice and menu setting and meal plans to body composition testing, things like that. Obviously, I'm involved in the supplement side of things as well with PAS. And with teams, you have to think about match day nutrition. And I know somebody asked a question about that on Instagram, which we'll probably touch on later. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that go into it with teams, and then with online clients, obviously depends on their goals. With teams, it tends to be more performance based because obviously that's their main focus, but body composition and health and wellness and injury recovery and prevention come into that as well. But with online clients, I find a lot of people, it's more about losing or gaining weight and maybe like healthy lifestyle habits. I've got a bit of a mix with clients. So some clients I've got are like there's one who's undergoing a bodybuilding prep at the moment. And I've got other clients who are like type 2 diabetic and need to lose weight. So
big contrast.
Yeah. Which is good. Like I enjoy that.
So obviously you come from a bit of an academic background. I know with kind of when you said the more time you can keep the sort of like athletes doing what they're meant to do, so in the gym, in on the field, that kind of thing. Obviously with the academic background, how much and how I know with S&C there's like an abundance of research out there, and it's kind of hard to kind of juggle how much research is out there, what's relevant, that kind of thing. How easy is the research in nutrition applied then in a practical setting? So is there like, because obviously like I'm not, and my Joel as well is not, that versed in the nutritional side of it. So how much of that research is actually practically applicable in a real world sense with athletes especially? And then you can touch on general pop if you want.
As with anything, there are always outliers. So there might be really good papers out there. Like nutrition, especially sports nutrition, is still very much an evolving science.
Yeah.
So there's new papers coming out all the time. You know, there's different opinions on loads of things. And you have to try and keep on top of it all as much as you can. And especially in terms of female athletes, there's a lot less research out there than there is in males. And then in terms of how easy it is to apply, you have to kind of know the literature, but also look at the person in front of you. So
yeah,
there's always going to be outliers in terms of, as you'll probably find when you're training people, there might be a paper that says you need to do this. So for example, with an athlete, it might be they should be on this many calories per kilo or this many carbs, for example, and there will be some athletes who either they lose weight on that or they gain weight on that. You have to go by the person in front of you, and they might be, it's hard to explain as well without like a particular paper in mind, but
yeah,
they might be kind of the best practice way of doing something, and then when you are actually with a team, it's about what can you actually do to get the job done.
Yeah.
So what's the best way of explaining that?
So it's kind of like there's an optimal, and then there's a realistic, practically.
Yeah,
There's like a practical element to it as well. So if you
yeah,
can't apply the optimal, you're just going to do the next best thing. Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, similar with the training side of things, because I know like you could get, I don't know, you've got these like sort of like norms of training, like your squat, your lunge, and that kind of thing, and sometimes they can't be applied to a certain individual, or one person may perform different to the next. So I assume it's that sort of the same on the nutrition side of it. Just to draw comparatives for the listeners. Joel, anything?
Yeah, and I think with that, I feel like with training, for example, say one exercise is supposed to be better than the other. So a back squat's better than a trap bar. And then you try and get someone back squatting, but they don't like it. So you compromise and you got the next best thing.
Yeah.
That might be due to like a physical limitation. For example, they might like lack mobility in certain areas. But with dieting, I feel, especially for general pop, is that big psychological factor. So how do you draw in buy-in? Because everyone has their own bias with things. They've read up, and like we chatted off air, there's so much shite on social media that they've seen this, they've seen that. How do you then try and draw them back to that optimal and get their buy-in to what you ideally want to see as a nutritionist rather than what social media tells them they need to do?
So a good example of that would be Game Changers. When that came out, I feel like everyone and their mother was talking to me about Game Changers for about a month. That's all anybody wanted to speak to me about. And, you know, you can understand why when, you know, such high profile athletes are being paid to promote a certain diet and are saying, you know, this is, and they're so successful and they're saying, this is what I do. You're going to get athletes who are thinking, I will do anything to be at that level and be, you know, get marginal gains. You can see why people are sucked into it. And obviously it sort of became the next fad diet for a lot of Gen Pop people as well. So basically the way I try and get around that is to just explain. So I won't just tell somebody, no, this is what you do, end of. I'll explain why. So I wouldn't expect anyone to just be told what to do and just off you go. If they've got a particular belief about something, it's about understanding where that's come from. If it is like a documentary, and then explaining, hang on, that was funded by somebody who owns a pea protein company, and you know, there's all these different elements which are quite biased, and you know, just going into things like, you can go down this route, but if you do, then these are the things you also need to be aware of. So with the Game Changers example, it was a case of, okay, you can become vegan if that's something you really want to do. That is your choice. That's not for me to dictate to you. I'll never try and dictate to people as such what they should or shouldn't do. I can only advise and explain why certain ways are more optimal, and then if they really want to go about it their way, trying to adapt to that as much as I can. So I think that's kind of how I get buy-in, is basically by explaining, okay, if you want to do it this way, this is what we need to do to support that. So if it is going vegan, it's okay, how, first of all, are you going to get enough protein in? The quality of that protein then is going to be a completely different amino acid profile. And then there's going to be people who don't really know much about that, so about the quality of the protein that they're eating. So for example, a lot of plant proteins are really low in leucine, which is the main amino acid involved in muscle building. So as an athlete who's trying to maximize their muscle mass as much as possible for performance, that's a major issue. And a lot of people don't realize that. They just see all the infographics, which are like, you can get protein from broccoli.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I know it. I know in the film they were on about peanut butter and comparing it to steak. When there was like 3 peanut butter sandwich is the equivalent of 1 steak, and it's like you can't compare.
I did an infographic on peanut butter versus a chicken breast in terms of protein. Maybe we can, I don't know if we can pop that on the screen or something, or link to it. But yeah, the amount of the volume of peanut butter you would need to eat to get the same amount of protein is massive, and the amount of calories you would need to eat is crazy. It's like almost 500 calories to get the same as what you could get in a chicken breast, and that's not realistic. It's not optimal in terms of your amino acid profile and what adaptations that would switch on in the body or not. So with athletes, it's not just about what's adequate, it's about what's optimal. Especially in elite sport, where, like I said, those marginal gains make all the difference. So yeah, with something like Game Changers, it's about explaining, okay, it's about your protein. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get enough protein? And how are we going to, okay, do we need to supplement all your amino acids? What about creatine? What about vitamin B12? What about omega-3? What about zinc? And the list goes on and on. And then there's so many aspects that I found people didn't really know about or didn't consider. It was just the protein. And then all of a sudden it all changes and they're like, I don't want to supplement all that. I can't keep on top of all that every day. And it's like, okay, that's not the best route for you then. And if it is in terms of aiming for weight loss, just explaining that that's not required and you're actually making life harder for yourself in a lot of ways if you do that. If you want to go about it that way and it's for moral reasons or anything like that, then it's totally up to them. And I will, it's my job to support that as best we can. But if it's just in terms of you think it's going to give you some sort of advantage, just explaining that you're just making life harder for yourself, really.
Yeah, going back to the buy-in element, I know you probably touched on it over the course of explaining that. Would you take the same approach of getting buy-in? Because obviously you work with athletes and you work with general pop as well, and you work with a massive variety of general pop clientele. Would you take the same approach to getting buy-in with all of them? Because I know that with athletes, there's questions, but it's more of like a, is this sort of, is the question, there's the answer, let's get on with it. And then with general pop, there's a longer process of sort of that explaining, this kind of like steering them along this direction and that kind of thing. Would you take the same approach with athletes to general pop and vice versa, or is there a bit of a difference?
I think it depends on the person, because there's always a massive variation in, when you work with a team, there'll be some athletes who want to know everything and there'll be some who just want to be told what to do and they'll crack on. I find that with Gen Pop as well. So like some Gen Pop clients have wanted me to explain things like um, the amino acids and like the roles they've got in muscle protein synthesis,
Mm-hmm.
and why it's optimal to eat protein every like 3 to 4 hours, and they'll want to get a lot more in depth rather than just okay, thanks for my meal plan, which is
Yeah.
good. Like I'd rather
Yeah.
people be able to know more about it, but there's always like a massive variety. So try and treat everyone as an individual, whether they are an athlete or whether they are Gen Pop, because ultimately, even if you are part of a team sport, you're an individual in that team sport.
Exactly.
So for me, it all comes down to that person and how they learn best.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that when I'm giving any like online coaching, like my approach will vary slightly as well, because there'll be
Yeah.
some clients who don't want you to be on their back and just want to be able to crack on and come to you if they have any issues, or it'll almost be like too much for them if they've got like a lot going on. Whereas other people need a lot more motivation and encouragement alongside explaining why they need to do different things and change their diet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, try and just go by what I think is best for that person.
Yeah, and I think we've touched on a bit of the fad diets there. And from a nutritionist standpoint, what is the worst fad diet / nutritional advice you've seen?
Oh, did you see there was one that advised people to stop drinking water?
What?
No.
Yeah, but I've got to Google this.
Yeah, because there's one thing, I've seen people do these like 30-day food fasts where they only drink water because you can survive without food for a long time. But I've never heard of a
Oh,
abstaining from water for a health
it,
standpoint.
it was the worst thing. I'm gonna Google it. I think it was it called? Oh, I put it on one of my Instagram stories because somebody asked me this on a Q&A.
Right.
Um, ah, what was it called? But basically, there were loads of like bloggers promoting it, and it was awful. It was the worst thing I've ever heard of in my life. It wasn't
What
Yeah,
was that
so
one you chatted to me about the other day, Joel?
oh, the Fast 800.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a TV show on it recently, and I don't know if you switched on. I think it was on BBC, and it was the same guy that come out with the 5-2 fast.
okay.
And basically, what he was trying to promote was if you're obese, it works really good for obese people. This, if you eat 800 calories a day for a month, you lose weight. And the thing is, you're supposed to keep that weight off.
What if you go back to eating as you were?
That's well, from what I've gathered, it was a sustainable weight loss tool. You just eat 800 calories for a month. They were promoting it as you've got your lockdown bod, you might have put on some excess weight, and they had 4 people on the show, and they come out and they said, this is X, he's put on 10 kilos over lockdown. This is this person, they put on 15. Their BMIs are all morbidly obese. And then they put them in this thing on a diet, eating 800 calories, and believe it or not, they all lost weight eating 800 calories.
Who would have thought?
Who would have
I
thought?
would lose weight eating 800 calories. Anyone would.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh my
exactly.
God.
So on that topic then,
Oh,
so you see quite a few people that get very restrictive with calories,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's something that people either all in or all out. I noticed
Yeah.
you never have some people that are, I'll eat 90% good, 10% bad, and that'll account for whatever. Is people that go, I'm ditching everything, I'm picking up the chicken and broccoli bandwagon, and that's all I'm going to eat. And they do that for, some people might last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden the cravings hit and they're bombarded, and then they go on a 3-day binge where they eat everything in sight. So how do you, like, because there's been a shift now from the whole chicken and broccoli bandwagon. I feel like there's the not intuitive eating, there's the flexible dieting approach now, where you track your calories, you track your macros, and then you just eat to your calorie goal for the day, and you can eat whatever you want in that period, but it's always trying to be educate on you've got to hit your certain macros and stuff now. So going on that topic of conversation, before we get into the whole what is flexible dieting, can you give a breakdown on the macronutrients and why they're important for sports performance? Because I know a lot of people demonize carbs.
Yeah, so carbs are really important. Everybody needs carbs. Carbs, for example, are things like bread, pasta, rice, and so on. So there's a bit of debate about brown versus white carbs, so like brown bread versus white bread, things like that. If you are purely talking from a calorie standpoint, and this will come with all of the macros, they would be, as long as you hit your calories, you can lose weight, but the quality of the food still matters, and there will be, I guess, better and worse times to have different types of carbs. So obviously for a lot of athletes, we want, and just Gen Pop, we want them to be in the whole grains, so like the brown versions, because they're higher in fiber, which is obviously good for a whole range of like health markers and keeps you fuller for longer. So if you are somebody who is on a weight loss diet, it's more about what food can you eat that is going to give you the energy you need. But if you are in a calorie deficit, you feeling full and having a larger volume of food is going to be more beneficial than you just hitting your calories, because you could get your carbs from Cocoa Pops, but you're not going to be full.
No.
So you're not going to stick to that diet. Even if your macros are right, you're still going to be starving at the end of the day. So it's about the quality of food as well. Yeah, so protein, obviously massively important. Your protein is not just important for muscle mass. Everyone thinks about protein in terms of muscle, but it's also really important for your bone health. It's important for like soft tissues, which is important. Like bone health is so important for everyone. Obviously, as we age, our bone mineral density declines, especially in women after menopause. So it's really important that we are trying to maximize our bone mineral density, keep those bones strong. Obviously, you've got the benefit of things like calcium in protein as well, and loads of other minerals like iron, omega-3, and so on. But yeah, then in terms of soft tissue and bone, especially for athletes, it's really important in terms of injury prevention. It's also involved in loads of processes throughout the body. So, for example, like the enzymes in your body. Obviously, you need protein for those. Sorry, my phone keeps going off. I'm getting distracted. Yeah, so protein is really important for, like I said, injury prevention. It's important for loads of processes throughout your body. And it's a lot more than just muscle building. So in terms of athletes, it's important for muscle building, yes, but also your recovery from training. And we want to maximize that muscle protein synthesis as much as we can. So it's really important that the quality of the protein, again, is right. So like we touched on the animal versus plant proteins, really important that we get in the quality right, as well as the timing of that protein. So every 3 to 4 hours, and the total amount of protein as well. So a lot of athletes will be eating around 2.2 grams of protein per kilo. So it's important that you get that in, but also how you timing that throughout the day, because the way muscle protein synthesis works is protein is constantly being turned over in the body. So if you are eating your total amount of protein for the day, but say you eat all of that at breakfast, not that you would, but say you eat all of that at breakfast, or you have like a large breakfast and a large dinner, you're going hours throughout the day without that stimulus. So your muscle's going to be broken down and it's not going to be optimal. You need to keep feeding that. So we are basically outweighing muscle protein breakdown with muscle protein synthesis. And obviously you outweigh the breakdown by feeding your body protein, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Is there an optimal amount of meals you'd consider? Because obviously if you a female or a smaller individual, you'll have a lot less protein to consume. So if someone eats, say, 3 meals a day and they split their calories over 3 meals, as opposed to splitting your calories over 5 meals, what would you say is probably most optimal? Because we always try and strive for that optimal.
So usually you'd want to eat protein every 3 to 4 hours. So you would want to have at least 20 grams every 3 to 4 hours. So that would usually work out as around, say, 5 meals. And then your total calories are going to reflect. You could split those evenly between those meals, or you could split them between the 4 meals and then have like just another serving of protein before bed, particularly protein before bed. So you're really maximizing that muscle protein synthesis overnight with that slow releasing protein. But then with larger people, if you're talking like rugby players, especially, who've got really high protein requirements, you know, you're going to say, yeah, at least 20 grams, but for them, that could be 40 grams or more per meal. Easily.
So just trying to spread that protein consistently over, say, 5 meals and then with a minimum of 20 gram at each meal.
Yeah. Or if your requirements are really high, you might have a 6th meal and obviously your calorie requirements as well. So it's just going to vary depending on the person, but really you want at least 20 grams spread out throughout the day every sort of 3 to 4 hours is ideal.
Perfect. So then we've touched carbs and protein, and the last one now, which is another one that's been demonized at some point, is the fat. So why do people need fat?
So we need fat to what was that?
Wriggling my little belly, look. We need fat to be big and strong like me.
Yeah, so fat, obviously, everything gets demonized, whether it's people telling you that chicken or eggs is as bad as smoking, which is not, or, you know, the carbs are the devil, or sometimes the fat's the devil. You can't win. If we listen to that, we wouldn't be able to eat anything. So
yeah, exactly. Just wither away.
Yeah, so don't do that. Fats are really important for loads of different functions in the body. They help us to absorb minerals and vitamins from our food, which is obviously really important. They're involved in like hormone synthesis. So for men, you don't want to completely cut out fats because it's involved in testosterone production. It's involved in like vitamin D synthesis in the body, cholesterol, things like that. So it's really important that we do eat enough fats, and the types of fats are really important as well. So we want to be eating more of the like monounsaturated fats compared to the saturated and trans fats, because they are beneficial for cardiovascular health and things like that. So thinking about like omega-3, and obviously all the different health benefits that go along with that. So like omega-3 is an essential fatty acid. So our bodies need it, but they can't make it. So we need to get that from either our food or from supplements. So most people, I find, don't eat enough fish, or they don't like it. And most people then I advise supplementing omega-3. Like there's a government recommendation, if you don't eat oily fish 2 times a week, then you should be supplementing omega-3. Obviously, if you're an athlete, you've got to make sure that's an informed sport tested supplement. But yeah, it's really important because we need it for brain health, cardiovascular health, healthy joints, and the list goes on and on.
A big theme in like today's, we've covered it a lot, is the amount of shit that is out there. What do people overcomplicate when it comes to nutrition? Because I know people get really flustered about it. I know I have sometimes been like over analytical with nutrition, and I get, Joel,
Don't
everyone
tell
does
me.
it. What are some of the biggest sort of like things that are overcomplicated when it comes to just food and supplements and all that kind of thing in general?
I think, especially with Gen Pop, a lot of people will jump from fad diet to fad diet when all they need is calorie deficit and some nutrient dense food in there.
Calorie fucking deficit, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So literally, that's why. So like a lot of my infographics lately just come back to you need a calorie deficit,
Yeah.
and for some reason they do really well. And I'm like, the simplest messages, like repeated, tend to do the best because I think there's so much rubbish out there that you just need to remind people. No, it just comes back down to this.
Yeah.
So like I said, I think, yeah, in terms of weight loss, all you need is a calorie deficit and nutrient dense foods within that. And obviously making sure you hit all your different like micronutrient requirements and things. But yeah, you don't need to jump from fad to fad. You don't need to go vegan or keto or do anything that's like something you wouldn't usually do.
Yeah.
That's not sustainable for you then. It's just about making little swaps, and you know you can have certain foods within your calories and enjoy
Yeah.
yourself, and then it's actually more sustainable and you're going to stick to it for longer and get better results.
Yeah, a lot of what I see is like from working with, obviously I work with Gen Prop, so it's literally all I see is like one extreme to the other, and
Yeah,
there's
so
never
you
kind of that middle ground where it's like
yeah
thinking like, oh, I'll just do this.
yeah so you get people who tell me I eat well all week, and then like the weekend comes and they're like, yeah, on the weekend I have a cooked breakfast, I have a takeaway, I drink a bottle of wine or two, and it's like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
um
is that
what we
people
gonna
don't realize the damage that they're doing through the weekend. And
yeah definitely.
is
Yeah.
that whole thing you can joke about, oh, on a weekend calories don't count, or on a Sunday calories don't count, but yeah, they do. And people don't realize that if you net balance across the week your calories, that you are actually not in a calorie deficit in the long run. And people come to you and they go, I'm in a calorie deficit, what am I doing? And you're like, you're not.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I see so many people who, it's not just women, but I find it's very common in women, or people who want to lose weight, but I find especially women who will really, really undereat during the week. So they might be on, 1,400 calories or lower even, and they'll do that all week, and then they'll be starving, and then come the weekend they will binge, they will drink, and I'm like, yeah, you're binging because you're starving.
Yeah.
If you are overly restrictive, your training's going to suffer, so you're not going to burn as much calories. You're not going to be able to really push in your training and get those adaptations. Oh, my laptop's going off. You won't be able to really get those adaptations, and then recover from that training for the next session. You're going to be hungry and miserable. You're not going to want to stick to it. You're going to be waiting for that weekend to come, and then you're going to overeat because you're hungry, and like a lot of people will be like, oh, I've got to get this in now because come Monday I'm back on the salads, and they'll like way overdo it and
Yeah.
actually counteract all of the work that they did during the week. And really, if they were on a higher intake throughout the week, their training would be better, they'd recover better, they'd be fuller, they'd be happier,
Yeah.
they'd get those adaptations and like body recomp. And then if they just tone it down a little bit on the weekends, they feel fuller, so they don't need to go mad, and they can make a food swap so they can still enjoy their food. Maybe find some alternatives or just cut it down a bit, and then people actually stick to it far better for longer, and they see that they are not able to lose weight but keep it off long term as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing that I see as well is yo-yo dieting. So you've
Yeah.
got people then that do really well, and I feel like a lot of the time people either want to be looking to lose weight or gain weight from my personal experience, and no one ever realizes you can get a lot from just maintaining your weight.
Yeah.
And it's something that I'm trying to preach a lot is that sometimes you can just stay where you are and learn, like, because eventually you're going to stop caring about what body weight you are. At some point, you're not going to be like, I need to be 4 kilos heavier, I need to do this. You're just going to have to maintain. And how would you implement periods of maintenance? I know he's used quite a lot. We mentioned Lane Norton previously, but he's on about bringing up people's maintenance calories. And how would you implement that into someone's nutrition when they've recently, say, come off a dieting phase where they've lost and then they're looking to, maintain where they are and increase their calories?
So depends on where they're at. So with some clients, I've had them diet throughout lockdown, and there's one I'm thinking of in particular. He's dieted throughout lockdown, lost a lot of weight, and now he's going back into rugby training, and he doesn't want to lose any more weight. He wanted to lose some body fat, and he did that, but he didn't want to get too light, obviously. So then we started slowly increasing his calories again. So you basically, obviously, because his energy expenditure is going up because his training's changing now, you have to basically find where his maintenance is now, because the amount of calories he needs are going to differ now because his training volume is going up. So, it might be kind of experimenting and adjusting as you go along for a lot of people. But if you do it slowly, you will reach a point where your weight loss basically stops and you start maintaining your weight, and that'll be a good maintenance level for you. So yeah, with a lot of clients, it'll just be a case of if they're happy with their weight loss, maybe they've lost a lot of weight and now they've stopped losing weight, because everyone will plateau eventually on the same intake. And maybe they're happy then maintaining their weight on that intake, or you can try and obviously increase their calories up a little bit. But yeah, with a lot of people who've like lost weight quite quickly, then I'd start slowly increasing calories back up and finding where that kind of sweet spot is for them, in terms of, like, especially if they're getting back into like more training now that obviously lockdown has been lifted and everything, trying to find where that maintenance is for them again, if that makes sense, because training is going to differ, especially if you play sport, and matches start back up again whenever that will be. Your expenditure is going to vary massively. So what was a maintenance for you before won't necessarily be a maintenance now. If that's the case, you're going to need a lot more calories.
Yeah, and I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people get caught up on in training. Oh, this plan I used got me so much strength, and everything changes. And I think what people don't realize is they get caught up on something they used to before. So it's like, oh, I used to be this weight, so I got to do what I did when I was that weight before to get back up to there. And no, I'm glad you touched on it there, that number varies and that you've got to actually experiment and find out, because a lot of people look for that secret portion. And I think that's why people get bought into the fad diets, is that, they get sold the dream. This is the one thing that you need to do to make sure you lose weight. When in reality, it's about finding what works for you and just trying to get that happy medium that you can sustain it and then carry on, living your normal life without too much restriction. I feel like that's one of the take-home things I've taken from you in this podcast, is that, it's not all about being optimal, it's about finding what works for you.
Yeah, so it's what's optimal for you. There might be something that somebody thinks is the optimal way of doing things. Like some people will think, oh, I need to go low carb, for example, because everyone was doing that a while ago. And you might think that that is the way you should go about it. But it's like with anything, if it's more sustainable for you to eat more carbs and your training's better and you enjoy your food more and you can actually stick to whatever plan you're doing, that's actually going to be most beneficial for you long term. So there, so many ways you can skin a cat, but ultimately what's going to be the best approach for you isn't necessarily what's worked for you maybe before when you had different training, or less training then, because maybe you didn't need as many carbs and maybe that's why it worked for you then. But if you're doing loads of training now, you're going to need those carbs for energy. It just depends on, I guess, your goals, your lifestyle, your training. Like there's so many different factors that play into what's actually best for you. And just because somebody else is doing something and has lost weight doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best approach for you. If that makes sense.
Yeah, perfect sense that does. And that's what you see so many times. It's like, oh, I'm doing this, it's worked for me. Yeah, it works for you. But I like what you said, what's optimal for you rather than what's optimal in general. I think that's quite I've never heard of that before, just saying like, that might be optimal, but what's optimal for you? That's a different way of looking at it. And I like the way you came with that. Good.
Yeah.
Valid point. So I think wrapping up on the heavy nutritional side of things, and we're going to get into some of the other questions. So without name dropping, what are some of the worst eating habits you've come across in elite populations? So this is in general pop, because I've been in around the elite rugby environment, and it can do a bit of work sometimes. You've got some people there that not too savvy with nutrition. But what's some of the worst things you've seen?
I think it's like with anyone, there's a massive variation. So it's just with athletes, it's just the same as if you were working with general pop. You've got some people who will be more educated on nutrition, and then you'll have other people who are not. Sometimes you might find with athletes that they think, I'm burning loads of calories so I can eat whatever I want. What else?
Yeah, shots fired.
No, that's not you. What else? I feel like it's hard for some athletes, like it's not so much a habit though. I won't put that one in, because some athletes basically live in gigs, so they live, like particularly footballers at academy level, they will live away from home with like a host family, and then sometimes they just have whatever's convenient. But then if I'm working with them, it's my job to make sure that they are eating the right things. So that's not really a habit.
No, because I've seen in one of the Fittest on Earth documentaries, and it was Rich Froning at the CrossFit Games, and I think it was the night before the final. He sat there with like a large bowl of Cocoa Pops. He's got a thing of pizza by the side of him, and he's just like, yeah, don't really care.
Carb loading, I guess. That could work.
Yeah, I used to do that. I used to eat two pizzas before a game. I had one game where I ate two pizzas before it, had a really good game, and then thought, you know what? That was the secret to success there, with nothing else. And I stuck to those two pizzas and become a fat kid very quickly.
Yeah, I think with athletes, I think more so in rugby, I find there's a lot, like a big focus on alcohol.
There's
typically.
socials,
So,
and the social aspect of rugby is a massive.
A massive social aspect, and I don't know anyone who, well, say at a lower level. I think it differs with some players at a higher level, but do you know any rugby players who don't go out and get pissed after they win a match?
No, not really. Like,
Like,
there's the odd few. So, like, I've been around clubs where you got the odd few that, just shoot off, don't drink. But the
yeah,
majority of the time, if you have a big win, the first thing you do is normally have a can in the shower and then jump into the bar, have a couple of pints. And with that, in regards then, what would be, because alcohol has been viewed as this thing. We've done a podcast on it before about trying to touch on like alcohol within your training. So how would you moderate alcohol with nutrition then? Because obviously alcohol's got calories in it. How would you go about fitting that in if someone did fancy a drink?
so if depends on people's intake now. So some Gen Pop clients will be starting a nutrition plan and they'll come from drinking like 2 bottles of wine over a weekend. So what I would advise them to do is to not cut it out completely, because I know they're not going to do that. So again, it's about making sustainable changes and then tweaking those over time. So I would advise them to cut down or to swap to something like spirits, so like, and diet mixes, so like gin and slimline or like vodka diet coke. The amount of calories that they are cutting out from by doing that is huge, and they will see good weight loss, and they can still have a drink, because if you tell them don't have a drink, they're just going to do what they want anyway, and it's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you kind of compromise and make changes that they can still enjoy, and it's part of their weekend, when they see results from that, they might not be happy about changing that the first weekend, but when they see results from doing that and they realize that can be kind of fitted in as part of their diet, you get so much more buy-in then. So it's more about, like, with Gen Pop, it's more about lifestyle changes. Alcohol obviously it's high in calories. It's 9 calories per gram. So 7 calories per gram. So almost as much as fats. Obviously more than carbs, more than protein. And alcohol, it's not just about the calories you consume on top of your food through alcohol, which most people don't really consider the calories they get from drinks anyway. But then obviously when they've been drinking, they then go into the kebab shop at like stupid o'clock in the morning, and then they then having a massive fry up in a McDonald's the next day. So that's a big one in terms of calories. It's not just about the calories and what you're drinking. It's also, okay, how else does that affect your diet? Are you then not going to be able to train the next day? Is it going to affect your training over the next couple of days? Alcohol also affects your sleep, so your recovery is going to be affected, and it also will affect testosterone and things like that as well. So some people, I found, particularly with like student athletes, it's a massive issue. So like a lot of people will go out on the weekend, then by like Wednesday, Thursday, they'll be going out again, and then back out on the weekend. And they might go out a couple of times over the weekend. And the amount of extra calories for one is massive. And then also, how is that affecting your training, your recovery, your testosterone, your metabolism? It's not just, it doesn't just affect you on the day you drink, but for a good few days afterwards. So when you are drinking like on the weekend and then like midweek as well, it all adds up a lot more than people think. Like, oh, it's just 2 drinks.
Yeah.
So yeah.
If you were then, so after like a binge on the alcohol, how would you then mitigate the sort of like follow up, the sort of like residual effects from drinking alcohol on the following few days? Like, what sort of steps would it, we'll say like 3 steps you would say for that individual to kind of do to kind of as damage control from that one night out?
I think that it's better, obviously, it's better to not go and have a massive binge in the first place and to try and
Of course, but
try and like make
we
better
love
choices
drinking.
if you can. But like I think once you've done it, you can. Some people will try and massively then restrict their calories for the
Mhm.
following few days to try and kind of get some energy balance. But realistically, if you starve, you end up binging. So I
Yeah,
would just get back on track.
just
Um,
business as usual.
yeah, that's what I would do. Or like if people tend to binge eat. So I've got a
Mhm.
few clients who have got histories of binge eating or like disordered eating patterns that
Mhm.
they're dealing with. And my biggest thing with them is to get them on a sustainable intake in the first place so they don't feel like they're starving themselves, because if you're starving, it's just like an over restricting, it just leads to binging. And I
Yeah.
feel like the same with um, alcohol or anything. Like if you try and massively then reduce your calories, you're going to be starving, you're going to end up eating more.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so I just think it's about a more sustainable intake, just getting straight back on it, and trying to limit how often you do that. If you do it now and again, um, it's not going to have as big of an impact. Whereas if you're doing that every weekend, then yeah, it's going to really affect your body comp goals.
All you
Yeah.
uni students, stop drinking. That's all I'm
Yeah.
going to say on that one.
Behave yourselves.
Yeah. So I think we had one question come in
Yeah.
that my phone's just decided to disable itself. So Dan, if you want to do us a favour and
I'm
read
on
that
it.
one.
I'm on it. Let's have a look. It's going to take me a while to pull it up. Right. Question is, what would the I'm reading it like a robot now. What would the diet of a pro footballer look like throughout the week, particularly on a game day? Could you give the timings of the diet on game day? Thank you in advance. Questions from Lloyd.
So what was his name? Lloyd.
Question was
Yeah.
from Lloyd, yes.
Okay, thanks, Lloyd.
Shout out Lloyd.
Big up Lloyd.
So on match the okay on a match week, let's try that again. Main focus on a match week is to obviously fuel for the match. So you would want to start your match day nutrition the day before. So you would want to increase your carbs, and that's going to be stored as glycogen in your muscles, which you're going to use for energy the next day. Throughout the week, then you would want to periodize your nutrition. So you would want more carbs on hard training days and typically less carbs on the lighter training days or the rest days. Um, Obviously, you would need more carbs to fuel you through the hard training days, and you can use the lighter days or the rest days as an opportunity to improve your body composition if that's something you are aiming to do, if you're trying to get a little bit leaner. And that can be a good window to do it because you don't need as many carbs because you're not training as hard. There will be players though who struggle to keep weight on, and then those days would be a good window to actually keep calories high, um, and help them actually have a window where they're not expending as much and so not burning as many calories, so they can actually kind of treat that as like a refeed day. So it depends on your goals. But in terms of fueling training, you would do more carbs on the harder days and less carbs on the lighter days. And then the day before the match is typically a lighter training day. Maybe you just do like a run through of the match. And that would be the day we really want to carb up. Rest and recover so that those carbs are going into your muscles to be stored as glycogen and you're not burning all those carbs. And then on a match day, depends what time the match is. You would typically want your pre-match meal 3 to 4 hours before the match, so you're giving your body time to digest that. And then if you are overeating, you could have some caffeine then like half an hour before, but make sure that if you are trying any supplements on match day, that you try them beforehand. Don't try anything new on a match day, because if it all goes wrong, you can't do anything on a match day. It will affect your performance. So make sure you try things in training first. So your pre-match meal may be your breakfast if you've got an earlier kick-off, or maybe you have like a couple of meals if it's a later kick-off. And then typically what I find works best is having a bigger meal at the start of the day. So like, players will have like a decent sized breakfast, and then having less closer to the match so that you don't feel too heavy. I find that before I started working with some footballers, they used to try and load in the pre-match meal, and then they would be getting stomach cramps, they would be feeling sick and sluggish. So you don't load in the pre-match meal, you load the day before, and then you basically top up on match day. And then during the match, you would want to have like isotonic drinks during the water breaks and a half time to basically top up your carbs, because you can use a lot of glycogen by half time. So that's basically going to help delay fatigue in half. And then following the match, you would want to get some protein in as soon as possible to help that muscle repair. And again, you would want to get some carbs in as soon as you can after the match and in the hours following, to restore that muscle glycogen and help your recovery.
Comprehensive.
Very,
Favorite.
yeah.
Yeah, there's no real
that.
questions for me. Yeah, no real questions there
No?
from me or Dan. I think we covered all the.
I do have a
stuff.
question. What would a macro wise and calorie wise, what would that day before match day kind of look like for the average player? I know that you have those individual differences, but how much would that differ to their regular diet
So
the day before?
again, it depends on a typical training day is going to look different for different people.
Mm-hmm.
So you will have some players who have like 4 to 6 grams of carbs per kilo on training day. So that is going to give you some variation. And you'll have some players who have up to 8 grams of carbs per kilo the day before match, which is a lot.
Jesus.
And you'll have some people who are like more at 6. So it's going to vary. Obviously, players like if we talk in football, a midfielder is going to need a lot more carbs because they're running up and down the pitch a lot more. And for example, a goalkeeper. And if they like working with midfielders before, like if they are the type of players who struggle to keep their weight up, then they're going to have a higher intake anyway all throughout the week than somebody who's trying to cut down their body fat. So it's quite hard to give general recommendations because I don't know what the person who's asking's goals are.
Yeah.
But yeah, typically you could have up to 8 grams per kilo of carbs on match day.
Yeah, that answers my question.
Large amount, yeah.
Yeah, and knowing who asked the question, that's not an ice cream, Lloyd. That's not.
And then you probably drop the protein a bit because the carbs are the most important on that day. Protein's still important to maintain your muscle on that day. So yeah, the protein will probably drop a little bit on those days, and fats as well, just because you're focusing on carbs.
Happy days. Thanks for answering the question.
Yeah. Have we got anything else that we've had on the thing that we've missed at the minute? I don't think so. I think we've covered everything.
We've covered everything.
Yeah. So to wrap it up now, is there anything that you want to direct the listeners to, or anything that you want to get across in your closing points of the podcast?
what could I direct you to? So we had a chat before we started about some good resources, and the only issue that I have with that is there's so much rubbish information out there. And some people want like courses and things. Like, so I get asked sometimes for like courses I would recommend. And to be honest, I can't recommend a lot of courses because the only courses I've done are like my degrees. Um, I can't recommend like a short course in nutrition because I haven't done them, so I don't know what the standard is. And the only courses I know of that are kind of a high standard are like there's one called the IOC diploma or like the ISSN, and those are basically like a master's and they're long. They're not really like short course at all. Um, so it's quite hard to recommend courses. I've heard of a few different ones, but it's hard to recommend those. So not so much courses. We could pop some links to any like papers if people want to read those, but I know people like a mix of different things. So like a lot of people are not going to want to read a paper. There's going to be people who want to know everything and people who just want bits and bobs of information in like a digestible, easy to read format. I put out a lot of infographics which I hope are pretty straightforward and easy to understand on Instagram.
What's your Instagram for anyone listening that doesn't?
It's at Chanel Team PAS. So I try to put stuff out there pretty often throughout the week. And like sometimes I'll do Q&As and stuff as well. So if you've got a burning question, you can send those over. But in terms of like people I would follow, there's Ling Norton, we've mentioned a few times. His Instagram is at BioLing. He puts out like a lot of really good content. He's like a researcher and it's quite like entertaining as well to watch his videos. What else do I like? I like James Smith. I think is his Instagram James Smith PT.
Yeah.
James Smith PT. He's good. Quite like straightforward. Nothing super in depth, but I think he puts across simple message as well. Who else do I like? They're the two that spring to mind. Off the top of my head. If you just want some follow on social media.
Yeah, if you think of anything more, we can pop them in the description. But as you mentioned, you're with a supplement company called PAS. So if you want to leave any closing notes on PAS, anything like that, buy the omega-3s for a start.
Any closing what?
Statements.
Any closing statements on PAS, like anything that you want to plug now? This is your time. The floor's yours. You can plug whatever you want.
No, I don't want to plug it as such. Just yeah, if you are an athlete looking for informed sport tested products, then the whole range is batch tested. So we didn't really cover supplements that much, but if you are an athlete, even at like the university level, it's really important that everything is batch tested.
Yeah.
So, and supplements can be a bit of a minefield. Like anyone could bring out a supplement. So these ones are all formulated by the nutritionist for the WRU and British Lions, so somebody who knows his stuff. And they're all batch tested. So if you're an athlete who gets drugs tested, that's as safe as you can be. And like with some companies, I find athletes have issues because they might see the Informed Sport logo on the website and maybe like a few products or like a range of products on that website are tested, and then they assume that everything is tested. So you have to be really careful with that. Whereas, yeah, PAS ones, they're all tested.
Yeah, happy days.
Perfect. So if you're an athlete that wants supplements, head over to PAS. They've got Informed Sport range all the way through. And are you currently taking on any clients at the minute?
Yeah, so I take on clients pretty much every week. I used to like stagger it so people are all like starting and stopping at the same time, but it's just become pretty busy now. So I'm just taking on new clients pretty often, as much as I can anyway. So yeah, the best way to contact me for that is probably, I get a lot of interest on that through Instagram. So yeah, we can just link that below.
Yeah,
And if there's any like questions you have or anything, feel free to send them over on there. Or if you don't want any nutrition coaching, but maybe you have like some questions or anything you'd like to learn more about, there's just loads of infographics on my page, so there should be something there that helps you either way.
Perfect.
Hopefully.
And I think you touched on the whole supplements thing. I think we'll have to get you on for another round, well, a round 2 of the podcast to touch on supplements, because like you said, it is a minefield. But
Yeah,
I think we've covered enough detail for the listeners today, and I feel like there's going to be so much that you can take away from this. So thanks for coming on, really.
Thanks for having me.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I enjoyed
So,
learning.
hang on.